Did you know that Ethiopian Airlines actually flies between Oslo in Norway and Stockholm in Sweden? Did you know that Condor flies directly from Frankfurt in Germany all the way into the Yukon Territory in Canada in the summer? Oh, you do? That's awesome, because today we are going way past those amateur stuff and go straight into the top 10 weirdest and most bizarre flight routes that are currently operating in the entire world. And since I am a professional flight hacker, I will try to justify the rationale behind all of these airlines' idea into operating these bizarre routes. Some of them are politically motivated, some of them are economically motivated, some of them just straight up don't make sense. And of course, as a professional flight hacker, it is another of my duties to tell you how you can get these flights as cheaply as possible. So, let's begin. And first up, there are 4 basic requirements I have outlined in order for a flight to make it onto today's video. The number 1 is that the flight has to be currently operating or is about to begin operating in the near future. Why is that so? Because in the good old days of 2018 and 2019, the good heydays of aviation, the airlines are launching random routes from left and right out of the blue, because all of the competition was very fierce in nearly every single part of the world, and the economic outlook was very good. But nearly all of these bizarre flights did not manage to survive the pandemic. So all of the ones that managed to survive have to have a really good reason to stick around, and it is my job today to explain to you why they are still here. And the second one is that it needs to be commercially operated and commercially scheduled. So that means no government charters, no private charters, and no one-off positioning flights that the airlines schedule in order to get a quick buck when they are repositioning their airplanes. And the thirdly is that I'm trying to avoid propeller planes today. Why is that so? Because all of the propeller-operated flights are generally much less costly than a jet-operated route. So I want to explain to you some of the weird jet-operated routes because they are much more costly to the airline and thus basically generate better discussions. So sorry, a lot of the smaller weird routes that you may know will potentially make it to a different video instead. And lastly, number 4 is that you have to click the like button beneath this video, because this took me weeks upon weeks of research, delving into some of the most bizarre airlines in remote offices in some really crazy parts of the world. So it really took me a lot of effort to make this video, and I would really appreciate if you can give me a big like down beneath in the video. And with all of that out of the way, let's begin with number 10. And let's begin right off with a banger of an airline, Air Neos. Ah, yes, the power of vacation. According to one of my Italian friends, Air Neos is the worst thing that has ever happened to the country. And you know that we are talking about a doomsday situation here when you can think about the scenario of Italy in World War I, Italy when they realized Americans are putting pineapple on top of pizza, their national food. You know, this is devastating. Yeah, according to a lot of my friends, they say Air Neos is very cramped and very uncomfortable. But hey, at least to operate to some really wacky places. And I remember a few years ago, I was very shocked to know that Neos flies directly into Nanjing, a third-tier Chinese city, just because it has a lot of tour groups coming back and forth from this small city into Italy. And then, nowadays, I was even more shocked to find out that they operate to some of the wackiest places in the Caribbean. Well, if you look up the map, everyone and their grandma would know that it is very reasonable for them to fly directly into a resort town like Cancun. But if you zoom in any closer, you're gonna find out they operate into this tiny airport called the Cayo Largo del Sur. This is one of the smallest airports even by Cuban standards. It only receives 1 flight every other day from the capital Havana, and that is about it. Why is that so? Because the island is tiny. And by tiny, I mean tiny. From the west side to the east side is merely 20 kilometers, and the roads only extend to about 1/3 of that. And the villages only hold about 1,000 people. And that means every single time Neos flies into the airport and drops about 400 Italian vacationers, the entire island's population goes up by about 50%. This is even more bonkers if you take a closer look of the island itself. Most of the eastern parts are extremely remote, sandy beaches that you cannot get access to, so most of the resorts are congregated next to the airport, which takes up about half of the width of the entire island. And since it is located in Cuba, it is extremely difficult to move about within the country. So that means if you fly into Cayo Largo del Grande, you are basically stuck there for the entire week until the next plane takes you out. And there's almost no way out of the island by boat or through any other means. So yeah, if you do some basic calculation, you're gonna find out the entire area you can possibly swim, walk, take a cab, and potentially bike around on the island is smaller than the airport that you departed from 11 hours earlier. Who wanted to do that, huh? Take a train all the way into the airport and fly for 11 hours just to be dropped off in a jail cell smaller than the Malpensa airport that you departed from. That is absolutely bonkers. Why would anyone want to do that? And most importantly, why is Air Neos even doing this? Instead of a weekly flight that forces people to be trapped on the island for a solid week, they could have easily done a daily flight into the capital of the country, Havana, or perhaps some other larger cities like Varadero, and then partner up with some local transport and tourist agencies so they can get them directly to Cayo Largo del Sur or any other very, very beautiful beach resorts directly from the airport. They don't have to do this, but for them it seems more economically viable just to dump plane loads of people directly onto this teeny tiny island and then pick them back up a week later. As for number 9, let's talk about the legendary Alaska Airlines Milk Run. This is a daily flight that goes between Seattle and Anchorage, the largest city in Alaska. And on the way, it stops in many small communities along the way. The first one is Ketchikan, and then Wrangell, and then Petersburg, and then Sitka, and then the capital of state Juneau, where it takes a short break, and it continues to Yakutat, Cordova, and eventually in Anchorage. And this is actually a series of flights that operate in each direction with different stops. So they weave a comprehensive web that covers every single community that I have just mentioned. And the cool thing about these flights is that it has been running since the 1930s, because the state of Alaska is extremely disconjoined with its panhandle, and a lot of these communities, even until today, do not have any land connection with the rest of the continent. And the only way for people and the goods to go in and out is through flying. If you want any urgent mail, any urgent deliveries, or any medical emergencies, this is the lifeline of all of these communities. And back in the days, they also shouldered the burden of deliver essential goods, such as milk, and that is why they are called the milk runs. And this route is so special that it almost deserves a separate episode by itself. This is because some of the communities that I have just mentioned are so small that they are almost comical compared to the large planes that are landing and taking off each day. Just to give you an example, the town of Yakutat has barely 650 people, and yet every day they receive 2 flights from Alaska Airlines 737-800s, and that means they have a seat capacity of 125 each. So yeah, every day, nearly half of the city's population can get out of town just by flying Alaska Airlines essential services. That is the equivalent of New York City receiving a 747 every 10 seconds. And more importantly, the milk run might be the cheapest flights that you can get on this entire list. This is because Alaska Airlines generously priced these flights as normal one-way flights between Seattle and Anchorage. So you can potentially hop onto quite a few of these flights, hopping all around the panhandle of Alaska without incurring too much of a cost. And this is especially true if you are redeeming Alaska Airlines miles, as it even allows you to make a stopover in some of these tiny villages for you to take a look and then continue on the next day. And you can easily make your way slowly from Seattle all the way to Anchorage for something less than 20,000 points. And for the experience of a lifetime, I think it is well worth it. Now we have witnessed the power of tourism, let's witness the miracle that is called VFR. It stands in the industry as visiting family and relatives. A lot of the airlines think it is big enough of a market if there is a quite significant minority of people that needs to go back to their homeland at least once or twice a year. And Azores Airlines is one of them. So they decided to launch a flight from Terceira Island in the middle of the Atlantic in their island chain all the way into Oakland in California. Yeah, I really don't get it. Yeah, it's easier to fly into Oakland than to San Francisco because it has a lower parking cost. But still, if you're flying 10 plus hours into Western United States, the fuel burn is gonna be much more important than flying into one of the airports that is more expensive than the other. So it is extremely baffling. And the second thing is that they could have easily used this resource and money to enhance their flights into Eastern Seaboard, such as Boston, New York, Montreal, and Toronto, where there is a very significant Azores people congregation within that area. They can easily partner up with one of the many huge airlines that fly very frequently for dozens upon dozens of times every day between New York, Boston, Toronto, and the Bay Area, so they can create a very seamless one-stop option. But for them, no, apparently. They need to fly from the Bay Area into Azores. And even more baffling is that they chose Terceira Island instead of Ponta Delgada, which is the biggest population center with more than double of the population. But instead, they chose the second largest island to fly into. And it is nothing about the airport either. Both of them can handle the 767 they are operating. I just don't get why. It is overall an extremely bewildering and baffling existence of a flight. As for number 7, it is impossible for me to tell you how weird some of the routes Ryanair flies is. But before I do that, I need to tell you why the airlines such as Ryanair exist. You see, after the deregulation of the European airline industry in the 90s, a lot of the legacy carriers kind of got very cocky. They think they're still the big players within the European sphere, and they do not have to innovate much in order to satisfy demand. Just to give you an example, Lufthansa, as the flag carrier and the pride of the German nation, decided to not set up a base in Berlin. Instead, all of the flights departing from Berlin has to route through either Frankfurt or Munich in order to go to virtually every single other place within the world. So a lot of the budget airlines decided to come in and fulfill the demand. They started launching routes directly from Berlin to a lot of really important places that you would logically think Lufthansa should have a non-stop option to, such as, London or Madrid or Lisbon or many other places. And it was very welcome indeed. That is why Ryanair and WizzAir and a lot of these airlines begin to succeed. However, they're growing so fast, every single unfulfilled demand and market has already been fulfilled. So what's next? Well, they went on the offensive. They started competing directly with the legacy carriers on their flagship routes, such as from Frankfurt to Madrid and Frankfurt to London. And thus, you have more and more competing airlines coming into this crowded space, and by about 2010, 2012, all of these have been filled. So what's next for them? They are so big, they are so rich, they decided that it is time to go beyond the game. You see, instead of satisfying a demand that is left out there or perhaps unfulfilled, why don't you just bring your own demand? You see, when you can create tickets and flights that charge only $10 or $25, everyone's gonna go and try it. People who do not intend on flying or people who never thought about flying and traveling in general would think, hey, if I can go to this random Spanish city for $10, $25, why don't I go and give it a try? And if every person in the city give it a try, that is enough demand for a lifetime. And that is exactly what Ryanair and WizzAir did. Ryanair started launching random routes all throughout Europe, and nowadays we end up with some of the most bizarre routes, such as this Pardubis to Alicante, and then Kaunas, the third largest city in Lithuania, to Rimini, a tiny city in the middle of Italy, Gdansk, the northern Polish city, to Vaxjol, I have never heard of this place whatsoever, and Dalaman in Turkey, all the way into Bratislava in Slovakia, and this flight from Baden-Baden, which I have actually been to. It is a tiny airport that you have to leave from the nearest major city, Karlsruhe, take a local commuter train for nearly 40 minutes, get off at Radstadt, and take this bus to one through tiny industrial parks and residential area for 1 1 solid hour before dropping you into this middle of nowhere hellhole of an airport, and Ryanair decided to launch flights from there to Lamezia, the 83rd largest city in Italy. And don't forget that you can fly from this place called Bergerac in the middle of France all the way to Bournemouth. What the hell is Bournemouth? Why is there an airport there? And why are people flying? Oh, it's $14. Okay, what is there to see in Bournemouth? For the next bizarre route, let me introduce you to this tiny island called Saint-Pierre and Miquelon. This is basically a tiny piece of land forgotten by the colonial history, situated at the coast of Newfoundland and Labrador up in the Maritimes in Canada. It is practically a French overseas territory that is self-governing, so it has quite a lot of ties to the motherland in France. So you would think that, oh, okay, then maybe Air Saint-Pierre will operate some of the regional flights to provide feed to all of the big airlines such as Air France and Air Canada in order for them to transport people back to the motherland, such as flying to Toronto, Montreal, and Halifax. That is exactly what they have been doing for the past 30 years. Except when it's not. You see, a few years ago, the government of Saint-Pierre decided that we need to do a little bit better. We need to have a direct link between the island of 6,000 people and motherland in Charles de Gaulle in Paris. So they required the Air Saint-Pierre to lease an ASL Airlines 737-700 to fly directly between Air Saint-Pierre's teeny airport and Charles de Gaulle. And that immediately comes with a slew of logistical challenges. First is that the airport was designed only for short commercial turboprop airplanes to make very convenient short hops to the regional capitals. It was not designed to have a jet take off and land even on a once weekly basis. So the first thing is that only 100 passengers can be accommodated for each flight. Otherwise, it will be too heavy to take off at the tiny airport. And the second is that it is kind of expensive. Yeah, even with the government subsidies, it still goes for about 500 euros each way. And not to mention, flying across the Atlantic in a tiny single-aisle aircraft for nearly 7 hours is a very gruesome experience in economy. Trust me, I know that. I flew JetBlue Airlines business class mint suite across the Atlantic in the A321neo, and that was already a wacky experience itself. You can check it out in the top right corner here. So you would expect that this is a very empty flight, right? Because the government even had to subsidize it. No, apparently it was extremely popular. Most of the seats have sold out this year already. And not to mention, it was launched around 2017, and the airline decided to make it a full comeback flight this year, right after most of the restrictions of the pandemic has lifted. So yeah, that must have been really popular. So maybe I'll give it a try next year. As for number 5, we have to move all the way down south to a different set of islands. This is the Falkland Islands, or as the Argentinians will call it, Islas Malvinas. This is a very contentious piece of land because in the 1980s, the British as well as the Argentinians fought each other in a very brief but a very bloody war over the control of this tiny set of islands, and it ended up with a complete defeat of the Argentinian Air Force and the Navy. So it has now been under the British control again. And yet, when I visited the islands a few years ago on my way to Antarctica, I found out that most of the folks living there are actually Argentinians. So it created a very intriguing scenario that most of the people living on the island actually need to go back to the mainland that is currently at war with it in order to see the family and friends. So what is the solution between the Argentinian government and the British government? Well, you're not gonna believe this. Every month, a LATAM Chile's A320 will operate a completely normal flight from Santiago de Chile, the capital, all the way down to the major city of Punta Arenas in the south. And then it will tag on a special flight from Punta Arenas into Rio Gallegos across the Patagonia on the Argentinian side. Pick up all of the friends and family that need to visit the island or the islanders returning back home as a special neutral third party and continue into Mount Pleasant Royal Air Force Base. And reportedly, this flight is incredibly popular with the locals as it is probably the only realistic way to connect long-lost friends and also broken apart families. Why they decide to do this way? Just to mess around with all of the people living on the island? We'll never know. Coming up in number 4, it is a flight that seemingly is so mundane and boring, it would end up in the top 10 most boring flight list I left on the cutting room floor. Every 2 weeks, Lufthansa operates a set of flights from Frankfurt into Strasbourg in neighboring France. And then you must be wondering, like, this is the most stupid and boring flight I have ever heard of. It is Lufthansa flying from their major hub in Frankfurt on their own airplane into the neighboring France. And Strasbourg is a pretty big city, so there's absolutely nothing special about it. Well, that is until you look into the details, and the mystery just gets even deeper. The very first layer is that Lufthansa only operates this flight 1 week out of 2 weeks, but in that week it operates a set of flights coming in and out every Monday and Thursday. And the second layer is that it only sells tickets on the outbound on Monday and inbound on Thursday. And this means that if you want to fly on the Monday flight, you can only buy the ticket from Frankfurt in Strasbourg and not the other way around. And if you want to fly on Thursday, you can only buy the ticket from Strasbourg into Frankfurt and not the other way around. And thirdly is that if you look into the prices of these flights, they are absolutely bonkers. They are almost in the thousands of euros for a flight that is barely 1 hour long. And fourthly is that if you look into the seat map, the airplane is almost 80% business class. That means all of the people who are flying these flights are exclusively business class passenger. And this is easily done because in European business class, they can easily convert all of the economy seats into business class seats by blocking a seat in the middle. And lastly, if you take a map of all of these locations, you're going to realize that Frankfurt is merely 2 hours of drive away from Strasbourg. And there are many daily connections on railway as well as buses between these two cities. In fact, on normal days, this route is operated by Lufthansa in their own bus division. So why does this route exist? Well, this is where everything crumbles down into the nitty-gritty dark details. You see, if you look into the European Union's meeting schedule, every 2 weeks they need to meet in Strasbourg for their parliamentary meetings. And this means that a lot of folks who are residing in Brussels or in their respective capitals need to come to Strasbourg once every 2 weeks and have their meeting on the Tuesday and Wednesday. They technically work the 4 days from Monday to Thursday, but honestly, you know, they are politicians. So they work like half the time, literally. So they start their meeting somewhere slow on the Monday afternoon, and then they finish it early on Thursday so they can all go home while they are enjoying your tax money. So yeah, this is exactly what this flight is catering for. All of them want to fly business class, so why not give them an almost all business class configuration? And if you think about it, it is almost despicable that both France and Germany are trying so hard to eliminate a lot of the short-haul airplane routes. So a lot of these shorter flights under 500 kilometers are being killed by government legislation because they are considered not green enough, while all of the politicians hop on this basically party bus across the air for less than 150 kilometers. It is absolutely unbelievable while the normal people are suffering, all of their connectivity are lost because they're flying from a faraway country and want to connect to their home that is 400 kilometers away from Paris or Frankfurt. They are not allowed to do so, while for the politicians, they get to hop on this flight and basically have business class service and catering and everything, while all of the normal people are forced to ride buses and trains. And coming to the top 3, I have to bring in another European low-cost carrier, this time WizzAir. Yeah, I know, it is virtually the identical Eastern European version of Ryanair. If you want to fly from Skopje in Northern Macedonia all the way to Turku in Western Finland in middle of nowhere, sure, you pop off, king, you know, do whatever you want. It's a free capitalistic society anyway, right? But today we are not talking about any of these. Some of their wackiest flights are not within Europe. And yes, I'm not kidding. Instead of going like Ryanair and create more and more random routes within Europe, they decided to set up shop and replicate their model in a complete different continent. In 2019, they agreed to set up a new base in Abu Dhabi of United Arab Emirates. And then in this year, after all of the economies have virtually recovered from the pandemic, they are going full out. They are launching flights from Abu Dhabi to almost every single corner that they need to fly to. Yeah, they are flying places to Amman in the Middle East, all the way to Sohag, a city I've never heard of in the middle of Egypt. And the craziest route I've seen them that they are about to launch in the next 2 months is that they are flying from Abu Dhabi into Sri Lanka. Yes, Sri Lanka. And oh, you think they are flying into Colombo? Ha, you are so young, so naive. They are flying into this tiny airport called Hambantota. No, I really don't know what it is, because apparently it is a tiny village in the southern coastal side of Sri Lanka with 8,000 people. A Hungarian airline registered their airplanes in Poland and using crew from likely India and a lot of other Pakistani, other smaller nations, is flying from Abu Dhabi in United Arab Emirates into a village of 8,000 people in Sri Lanka because they do not want to pay the fees in Colombo, the major airport of the country. Okay? Like, we have reached terminal capitalism here. We are all doomed. This video is over. We are all gonna die in a few... What? Oh, it's $40? Okay, do they take Visa or MasterCard? Coming up in number 2 is a flight that helps me a lot. It is basically my savior. You see, at night when I have trouble sleeping because I question my very own existence, I always think about this flight, and it makes me feel way better. Every single day, an airline called ASKI or ASKI, they are affiliated with Ethiopian Airlines. So, you know, they are a major player in Western Africa. They fly from the capital of the Republic of Congo called Brazzaville into the capital of the Democratic Republic of Congo, a different country called Kinshasa. And you say, oh yeah, it's just a normal flight, right? From a capital of an African nation to another capital of an African nation. There's nothing wrong with this kind of flight. Well, except I show you this map. Yeah, this is Brazzaville and this is Kinshasa. They are literally across the river. In some cases, you can probably see from one airport to the other side, and this is operated by a 737 jet. Yeah, I really don't know why this thing exists. In the closest point of crossing, you can probably go through the ferry way faster than going through on an airplane. And more miraculously, if you compare the distance of the central station of Brazzaville and Kinshasa instead of comparing the airports, because, you know, nobody lives at the airports, it is only 4 kilometers away. And for my American viewers, it's about 8,000 ferries lined from head to tail. Yeah, it is incredibly close. I'm pretty sure some of you who are really good swimmers can probably make through the border just by swimming. This is definitely one of the wildest routes in the world, and they are charging you $350 for it. And finally, we are on to the number 1, the most bizarre route that you can currently buy a ticket and fly on in the commercial aviation world. Are you ready? Because everything surrounding this flight is absolutely bonkers. Okay? Every Sunday at 8:30 p.m., an A320 from Yemenia, the national airline of Yemen, departs from Cairo airport to the tiny village of Aden on western side of the country. And then it stays overnight there for 7 hours in order for the crew to rest, and then the entire same plane continues into a tiny village called Seiyun on the southern coast of Yemen. And then after a refueling stop, it continues onto the island at the Cape of Africa called Socotra. Yeah, I don't know why this exists. Apparently, it is a very popular flight with tourists because Socotra is a gorgeous, gorgeous place. It is filled with unique flora and fauna, and not to mention the people there are extremely warm and hospitable. But still, this is a flight that is operating in a country with an active war going on, with John Oliver describing the country as
Yemen, home to 26 million Yemeni people and 27 million American drones.
That is just the operational side itself. Just getting this ticket is absolutely bonkers as well. First thing is that you cannot buy this ticket online because Yemenia is basically sanctioned everywhere. So the only way to get this ticket is to physically show up in Cairo and go to the Yemenia office in downtown and physically present yourself and your passport in order to buy the ticket. with cash, of course. And the second thing is that you cannot buy this ticket without a Yemeni visa. And how do you get a Yemeni visa? You can only get it with one of the very few handful of tour operator on Socotra Island. And you have to contact them first and pay an exorbitant amount of price, usually in the $4,000 to $5,000, in order to get them basically sort everything out for you. They will pick you up at the airport, they will take you for a tour, and they will send you back onto the airplane 1 week later. And then, of course, they will also help you arrange a paper visa that you can print out yourself and present yourself at the Cairo office so that you can get your ticket. And the third point is that this ticket is ridiculously expensive. For about 1 night of flight and then a gruesome overnight in the tiny airport in Western Yemen that you cannot get out of, another gruesome flight with 1 stop onto Socotra Island and then all the way back the same way, you have to pay more than $1,000 US for this kind of torture. And let me quote one of the very few bloggers on the internet who have any knowledge of all of these operations, okay? Please do not email me demanding to know how to get a visa without booking with a Socotra operator because you do not want to be guided for or pay for it, etc. If you want to visit it so badly, I suggest you start saving towards it or visit elsewhere, as there are hundreds if not thousands more easily accessed, less remote and cheaper to visit places on Earth. Cool, this made me want to visit the island even more. But okay, all of the jokes aside, I know Yemen is suffering quite a large humanitarian crisis, and I do believe Socotra is incredibly beautiful and unique. I want to travel off the beaten path as much as possible, but this just seems like way too much of a hurdle to jump through. And oh, did I tell you there are consequences of visiting this kind of place? Yeah, if you have a Yemeni visa on your passport or basically just have been anywhere near Yemen in general, you are basically screwed when you come to the Western world. Every single place, such as United States, Canada, or Western Europe, will question you to no end if you have ever been to Yemen. And yeah, if you are European or if you have someone who have visa-free access to United States on ESTA, just say goodbye to it for the rest of your life. You are not gonna get a visa-free access for the rest of your life. Yeah, I don't think that is a good deal. And these are the top 10 most bizarre flight routes that are currently operated in the entire world. Did you learn something new? And if you liked it, please consider clicking the like button beneath this video. It will really help me out. And if you want to check out some of the other extraordinary experiences off the beaten path or want to learn some flight hacking techniques, consider clicking the subscribe button as well. And after all, we are all gonna travel on all of these routes together, aren't we, huh? Have you tried any of these routes before? And especially on the Socotra one, like let me know like how it was like in the details. Like I want to know, DM me, okay? And if you want to try any of the routes in the near future, you should also let me know because I'm really interested in joining you in the next leg of the journey. And with all of that out of the way, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want to see some more related videos, you can also see it around me. And I will see you around, hopefully not in Yemen in the near future. Yemenia Business Class Review. What? Nobody has done it before? My time has come.